Marriage used to be recognized as about family formation. Family was the essential unit of society. Historically speaking, it was not the individual who was the central unit of society, it was families. Families, you were born into one. You're not born as an individual in a forest somewhere. You're born into a family structure with a mom and a dad, historically speaking. With brothers and sisters, usually grandparents were part of this broader family structure. You were born, in essence, into institutions that pre-existed you, and you were expected to perpetuate new institutions that would exist for your children. And society was dependent on this. These little platoons, as Edmund Burke suggested, you have loyalty to them. Then you have loyalty to the local community that's made up of a bunch of families who think similarly. And then you have loyalty to a broader social structure that encompasses those families. But the family was key to society. The key element of marriage was not, in fact, what we would call romantic love. The key element of marriage was what we would call duty. It was duty to your wife, if you're a man, duty to your husband, if you're a woman, duty to your children, for both. This is what marriage was about. And this is why marriage, when you were looking for somebody to marry, typically you didn't do it in rom-com fashion. The way that you found somebody to marry is you did it through your church, you did it through your synagogue, you tried to find someone who shared values with you, which is why durable marriages tend to share values. Now, of course, the idea is that you're only supposed to get married if you get married at all, basically on a whim, that essentially you have sex first before you fall in love with somebody. Then maybe you fall in love with them, and then maybe if you're like one of those old-fashioned people, for old-fashioned reasons, maybe you get married. Because marriage is no longer about the generation of a new family unit. Instead, what marriage really is about your mutual pleasure with somebody else. That's all marriage. Well, once that happens, same-sex marriage is the natural coda to that. And same-sex marriage is not really the issue that we're talking about here. What we're actually talking about is the enshrinement in American law of the idea that marriage is no longer about family formation. Because it's not about family formation. Because family is not about voluntary formation. The idea of the voluntaristic family is a very new idea in all of human history. Before that, it was just a thing that happened. It was a thing you were born into. You didn't volunteer yourself into a family, you're born into one. You didn't even volunteer yourself in human history into a family formation in terms of marriage sometimes. Like 40% of all marriages in about 1940 were shotgun weddings, where somebody would get pregnant and then the baby was early, right? The idea was that family formation was a natural part of humanity, and it was something that society had to prop up. It was something that society had to foment. You had to have social standards that promoted things like monogamy, that promoted things like sex within marriage, that promoted things like have babies. These were all social standards that were considered societal goods and necessities, not just goods, necessities. And then we decided that we were essentially going to discard all of that. We decided that it was no longer necessary in a prosperous society, that we had substitutes for things like the institution of family. And this came about for a variety of reasons. Birth control is a big one, because it turned out that nature cut very much against the idea that voluntaristic romantic association was the key to life, because usually that resulted in a baby, and then somebody had to take care of a baby, and so the family would automatically form around the baby. Birth control severed that connection, so that was one thing. And then welfare came about. Welfare completely severed the connection, because now the idea was even if you had a baby, daddy doesn't have to be around. Government will be the daddy, and government will pay for everything. And so marriage basically became sort of an evolutionary holdover. It was essentially a vestigial organ in institutional life. Well, the problem is marriage is not vestigial. Marriage remains essential.